Well, speaking of bubbles, I feel like that's as good a transition as any into our top story. Wow, what a firestorm. Major changes to interdiction nullification and warp core stabs. Oh boy. I want to say this is a change that no one asked for, but I realize that there is a huge portion of the game that has continually asked for it, even though it doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Yep.
There's this smooth-brained part of the community that's like, oh, if we remove interdiction from interceptors, all of a sudden all those people want a PvP suddenly, and they won't do other things to get around the gig camp. Like, no. There's a huge portion of the game that's just trying to get from A to B, and they're going to do it at whatever the cheapest, fastest, safest thing is. And as long as there's interdiction in something, like interdiction in shuttles, which they're adding, that's going to be it. Like, they're going to use that instead. You're not going to suddenly get all these interceptor kills. It's not going to happen. If you think that's going to happen, think about it a little bit more. You haven't thought it all the way through. All you've done is just removed a really great tool from a really unique ship class at the end of the day. I'm probably not going to be flying Inties much going forward. I think I have kind of in my head decided to transition over to the carries maybe, which gives you not only the long point range but also the damps. And if I can't work through bubbles anymore, I need more of a power spike from something.
It's gonna change a few things. I mean, let's imagine these changes are here to stay, which there's no indication that they're going anywhere anytime soon. It has shaken up the fleet scepter model somewhat, because suddenly I noticed that people are kind of using kind of like the crow more, which I know, Alek, you've got to think about the crow, but it wasn't that. It wasn't that good.
It was most DPS.
No one cares.
At your max point range. And you could fit a target painter to it, which is great for bomber fleets and battlecruiser fleets and everything.
And so this module came along and nuked your CPU, and suddenly now you can't have all your DPS anymore.
Yeah.
But I mean,
it was already really tight.
I mean, some of the other scepters perhaps maybe a little bit better, but I think the CPU cost is really quite a turn off for me itself. I mean, my normal malediction fit, I've had to make one or two little changes too, but I mean, it's still required a bit of a downgrade, and it's a nerf of this class. And as you say, for traveling, and I get where the shuttles come from here, that you could, and people have been asking for notification for shuttles for years. I mean, they're pretty much uncatchable unless you've got a smart bomber. But otherwise, as I say, I thought this was a little bit retrograde myself.
Well, it's not just the CPU. I mean, that is an issue for sure, but also the lock range. Even with the roll bonus reduction for the fleet interceptors, you already sometimes had to rig or include a sensor booster in your Inti fit to get the most out of your point range, and now you're taking away even more. You basically need to fit a SIBO or need to dedicate your rigs to targeting range, which is a huge nerf.
Yeah, I really don't like the fact that the fleet scepters, even if it is 20% of the 100% bonus, that they still get the note, and it's a full halving of scan res, which I kind of get where they're going with that, because you can't have an insta warping, malediction that can be made to nearly insta point everything. They're kind of making it so you have to pick one or the other. So my insta level fit will not have the nullifier on because I need the scan res. But again, I get the feeling it's one of those things that I think we'll transition towards. But I just wonder if a small tweak to make the fleet scepters more to give the fleet scepters a bit of room, because I think this was really heavy on them.
Just put it freaking back to being integrated into the ship class itself. Like, what harm does a passively nullified fleet scepter cause? So where was it problematic? What portions of the game did it break? The only thing it did was make traveling easier before shuttles were nullified. It'll still make traveling easier in the future, even after shuttles are nullified, because shuttles don't survive smart bombs. And it also made it so that you can tackle something trying to run away from you if it has a dictor doing defensive bubbles. Like, what was problematic about the passive nullification of a scepter? I do not understand, CCP. This feels like a change that was not needed. Like, for any reason whatsoever. Just straight up not needed.
I just feel like they decided to bend the whole class for not much reason. Like, I get that it apparently will make some of the nullsec people happy, which, okay. Like, if you're a space owner, yeah, I guess the most nullification you can get rid of, the better. The more nullification you can get rid of, the better. But, like, from a game, to your point, Artimus, like, what was the real harm? Yeah, you could, like, if you're a goon swarm or a test type, you could probably put, like, 250 crows on field and, like, warp around a constellation with impunity and blow stuff up. But
Fozzie Claws hasn't been a thing for how many years?
And even when it was a thing, it's Fozzie Claws, not Fozzie Stilettos. Like, they didn't even use the interdiction nullified version.
But they took interdiction nullification off that class itself and gave it to the fleet scepters, and now they've taken it off the fleet scepters again. It makes no sense.
It's absurd. This seems like just a ridiculous change influenced by powerful nullsec blocks that negatively impacts hunters, roamers, etc., for no good reason whatsoever. And I hope that Talos realizes this and fixes it. The changes to, what are they called? To T3s, personally, I'm not as salty about. I'm very much not happy that it takes a slot, but on your Hunter T3s, typically you have a high slot to spare. The fitting is less of a restriction similarly, and also the speed with which you move means the extra 20 to 30 seconds of wait time for the thing to cycle is less of a thing depending on the intensity of your hunting. Like, there are very much some people who the way that their gameplay worked is just now broken because they can't move their T3s fast enough to catch that redding super or whatever. I'm less upset about it. Granted, I use it a whole lot less than my interceptor, so maybe I'm just not familiar with the ways in which it hurts that gameplay.
Carpeting your system in bubbles pre-interdiction nullification, when that was a mechanic, that used to be a very common thing for the crabs and botters. They'll just, like, cover a gate with dozens of large bubbles. By the time you get your ship out of it, they are long gone. Pulling that away from viable tacklers now just makes ratting that much more safer, and it was already very skewed toward the defender, as we've been experiencing frequently on these nullsec contracts, like against Fraternity. It is so difficult to catch anybody, really, because it takes a while. They have automated tools to help them. Sometimes the players themselves are automated, and they're just gone by the time you get anywhere close to them. And now they have an extra 30, 45, 60 seconds before you clear their bubble swarm. And, you know, I just think it's moving the game in a very strange direction, given all the other things CCP has been doing.
I mean, the concept of the taxi scepter still exists, because you can make a sub 2 second scepter. I mean, my malediction is sub 2 seconds itself by default, and just basically strip away all offensive capabilities to it, and you can move a bit faster. And you're going to see more scepters dying as a result to insta-lock and gate camps, because, you know, if they can hit their interdiction nullify subset their button, and yeah, they can get through the bubble. But most of these fits may take fitting changes that might just push them over the 2 second align time.
And then you get the nullified scanny ships out of it. So, like, catching your exploration frigs, if they're paying attention, they hit the button. Good luck.
Yeah, so I mean, the covert op ships that have 3 high slots as opposed to 2 have got a real advantage against those that have got 2 against 2. So I think that's the Buzzard and the Helios versus the Cheetah and then Aftermath, I think it is. They've got an advantage, and the T1 and Indy's got it as well as the DSTs and the Blockade Runners. The latter 2 I can understand with those lot, and they don't have the bonuses of the T3 subsystem nullification and the Fleet Scepters. But going back to the original point, I think is that these Scepters, there'll be fitting changes to them. If they want to move fast, they're going to sacrifice something. Usually it's the offensive capability, but none of them had it really to begin with. And either all the scan res has been halved, their lock range is going to be nerfed unless you, as I say, counteract that. And if you use SIG amps, you're probably not going to be 2 second align anymore. If you use ionic field projectors, you may not align that fast or walk that fast. It's just a nerf where it wasn't needed.
Yep, just makes it, in general, harder to catch things. Either you're in a tackle ship and it's harder to do your job as a tackle ship, or you're trying to catch something that's hauling or something that's doing exploration sites, and it's easier for them to run away. And we haven't even touched on warp core stabs yet.
As good a transition as any, Artemis. What do you think about that? I feel less. It just connected with me less. I don't know if that's because they announced them at the same time, or if the changes just won't be that impactful. But for whatever reason, I wasn't as hung up on these.
You know, I'm not either. Mostly because I haven't seen how people are going to abuse it yet. Personally, like, if I can't think of a situation in which somebody had enough low slots to be using more than 3 warp core stabs, and the people who were like using warp core stabs to run away, it's a buff to the healers and the Ishtars who are putting in warp core stabs so that they could run away, because now they only lose 1 slot and they have +3. So instead of having to have a scram on you, you have to have 2 scrams now, which sucks.
Is it +3 or is it +2?
3. Yeah, it's a lot more value for the slot.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but at that level of warp core strength, you also have fewer side effects. I didn't do the math myself, just looking at the numbers versus like number per module of the individuals when it used to be multiples. I'm pretty sure the downsides went down too. Which, I mean, now you have to press a button to run away, but if you're pressing the warp away button, you can manage to press your warp core stab button. Like, this is not a meaningful addition of gameplay or complexity.
So just to come back, lads, but I think it's 2 rather than 3.
Is it only 2?
It was 3 when they announced it.
They tweaked it down slightly during that. I mean, I thought the implementation of this update, I think just as a side note, was rapid. I mean, it hit the test server, and then suddenly it was like, yeah, it's going live. And it was like, hold on, what?
Yeah, this whole thing turned around real fast. I've noticed that with a lot of CCP changes now. They'll release it, and it'll like go live in a couple days. Which, I don't know, I guess I'm a little ambivalent about. I'd like a full week to just, get caught up and read about something. But, I assume that we're more plugged into that kind of thing than most people.
Yeah, Laeve gave us a screenshot of the module on TQ. It is -2. It still requires either a faction scram or multiple points. But that is better than 3. I'm happy with that. Because a typical, like my standard stiletto fit is scram long point. So I would be able to catch ye old ratter with a warp core stab. And they can only fit 1 now, which is nice.
Yes, I think most scepters out there, unless they're dedicated for a role, will have at least 3 points over a long and short scram, and long and short point. So, this is. I mean, it certainly also hits the drone ships quite nicely, because it neuters down their. They will do less DPS as a result, because they can control less. The Gila takes a hard 50% nerf just straight off the bat.
Well, a little less than 50% because it uses drones and missiles.
But you can only use 1 drone. And for a tackler, it's kind of nice to only have to worry about 1 drone.
Yeah, that's true. It'll be a lot easier to control that drone with your counter scrams and webs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I just don't see anybody using a drone ship with these things, if they're trying to rat. Because it was mentioned when we were discussing this in a quite heated way in our Discord when it first dropped. And it was brought up that a 50% reduction in your DPS is like a 70% reduction in your ISK making ability because the rats rep. And I can attest to this personally. Like, as I skilled up my ratting ults over time, it is exponential growth in your income because the faster you kill things, the less reps they get off, which means you kill them even faster than you would if they were a flat level of HP. It's just... I do not see Gilas or Ishtars fitting warp core stabs anymore, which is cool.
Yeah, but it's not like there aren't other ships in the game that they could be using.
Yep. I would imagine Ravens with auto-targeting missiles would be a good thing to come back again. Barguests are pretty popular with those, and these taking only 1 low slot is going to be very beneficial to them.
Well, I think that's just it, isn't it? I mean, the ships that typically uses like the Heel and the Ishtar were ships that could employ sig tanking, which means that they can ignore a lot of the DPS that comes at them. The battleships' only real countermeasure is to either face tank it or still go at extreme range, which limits their offensive capability.
Yeah, the auto-targeting ones that I typically see are going at extreme range, which the warp core stabs do have the reduction to your targeting range. I'd have to check the fits, but I'm pretty sure there's enough room already, like on the standard Raven or Barghest fit, to add enough sensor boosters to counteract that. But we'll see how we'll have to see how the bots adapt and how the players who very much enjoy the low input style of gameplay adapt if they were also looking for the decreased risk of no warp core stabs. But there's also, like, apart from Fraternity Space, I never really saw many ratters using warp core stabs to begin with. Most people just rely on their channels and discords and tools to ping them whenever there's a hunter within 2 jumps, and they're docked up before the hunters got them tackled to begin with. So
we thrashed this issue out last episode about the fact that tools and local are there, and that should be the next major thing that they fix. But overall, I mean, I'm not that fussed about these changes, and I think they're somewhat beneficial for certainly for our play style, which is going to hunt these people.
Yeah, I think if you give me passive nullification back on my scepters, and I'm happy with these changes.